I appreciate that introduction. I was waiting for somebody else to jump up here. And you guys were all probably expecting somebody way shorter, right? So, I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak today. You're all coaches. I feel like, I was raised to be a coach. My dad was a baseball coach, soccer coach. He was a state championship baseball coach in New Jersey. And really from the time that I was a little kid, I felt like I was groomed to be an athlete or groomed to be a coach. Unfortunately, due to life and life circumstances, injuries, I never got to fulfill those dreams, but I think God had a better plan. Today, before I speak, I wanted to just go over a couple things. She mentioned that I'm an author. The great thing, and I'm going to use what Jenny said, and I'm going to break down and kind of shorten that introduction. My title is chiropractor, but my clients are people who really like to live, to work, and to play hard. And many of them have been faced with the potential of losing that because of either poor dietary choices, weak spines, weak muscles, or in very many cases, weak spirits. And I thank God that I've been oftentimes given the opportunity not just to correct the physical problems, but to speak into their lives and to help them overcome those emotional problems. Because how many of you know that emotional problems can often lead to physical problems? Okay? When you've got a hurt and a weakened spirit, it eats away at your flesh. So this book here, that's my most recent book, she mentioned Shake Off the Snake. Let me go ahead and just see if I can move this here. And I'm going to have the same problem that Vince had, I think. Which button is it? Oh, the bottom one. There we go. All right. She mentioned my first book, Shake Off the Snake, which was written specifically for people suffering with fear and anxiety. This, to me, is really going the next step beyond that. Once you overcome fear, once you overcome anxiety, then you need to start to you need to put into your spirit on a daily basis what you need to grow and to advance. Because how many of you know if you don't advance, you're actually going backwards? So be, do, have is daily attitudes, affirmations, and actions that lead to uncommon success. You hear about books like Think and Grow Rich or The Secret, and they take the idea of everything comes from the mind. Well, the mind is great. God's given us our thoughts, but if they stay as thoughts and don't become actions and deeds, they'll never produce anything successful. So this is a book that I'm very proud to have written. Actually, it's amazing, but this past week I was in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I had an opportunity to meet with a tremendous man of God who's written a couple of books. And after reading it, we are pretty close to an agreement where he is actually going to publish that. Vince talked about books in piling up in people's garages, and I don't agree with that. Any book that I have, if I can't sell it, I'm going to give it away. So, and actually, Lucy, I wanted to give you this copy here. And I'll autograph that for you before I leave. So anyway, I know that I don't know how you are, but me, I'm like a kid on Christmas morning. When I buy somebody a gift, it's like I don't even want to wait till Christmas. I want to give it to them the next day. And really, I've been thinking about this since last night. I had to be in Tampa this morning at 7 a.m. I do a procedure called manipulation under anesthesia. We had maybe a slight mix-up because I thought today was Saturday. And I texted Lilo and I said, I don't know if, what time can you have me speak late? Fortunately, everything was good. I made it to Tampa and I got back. But it reminded me of a story that one of my pastors had told me about. He's up. I'm from New Jersey, from the Northeast, and he had went to visit one of his parishioners. And when he gets to the door, she lets him in. And within a few seconds of him sitting down, she gets a phone call and she says, Pastor, please forgive me. I got to take this call. It's my sister. She's calling long distance. Well, an hour later, she comes out of the kitchen and she apologized. He said, that's okay. I just hope you don't mind that I ate all these peanuts that you had here sitting on the table. She said, oh, I don't mind at all because all I could do was suck off the chocolate anyway. So I promise not to keep anybody waiting. But I did want to say one last thing before I start. I want to say one last thing before I start, and it's this, I want to commend you, Lilo. because this kind of conference, I mean, I sat down, and I apologize for the speakers that I missed, but I pretty much came in at the end of Nellie's speech and got to hear Vince and obviously Jenny. And this is what I call value-based education. Because you see, I went to actually undergraduate school, then I went to chiropractic school, and it took 7.5 years before I could apply what I learned. It took 7.5 years. Literally, within 2 seconds, I was able to apply what Jenny just taught. Literally, when I leave out of here today, I'm going to apply what Vince taught. And hopefully, when you leave out of here today, you'll be able to apply what I'm going to teach you about influence and persuasion. I'm going to teach you about influence and persuasion. Influence is a science, but it's also an art. There's been a lot of research that's been done, over 50 plus years of research in university studies. Now, I'm not an academic. I'm in the real world. I really believe that I'm in marketplace ministry. I have no desire to be a pastor or an external evangelist, but I believe God's put me exactly where He's put me for a reason. And God can use my professional credibility to touch people on a personal level. And regardless of where you are in life, professionally, personally, God can use you wherever you are. So today I want to talk to you specifically about 6 universal principles that have been found both through university study, but literally also through the training programs of major Fortune 500 companies, of Army and Navy recruiters, of door-to-door salesmen, of car salesmen. Principles that you can literally start, when you leave here today, you can use and be more effective agents of influence. Scripture key. How many of you know this scripture? The prayer of Jabez, right? Jabez says this, "Now Jabez called on the God of Israel, saying, Oh, that you would bless me indeed and enlarge my border, and that your hand might be with me, and that you would keep me from harm, that it may not pain me. And God granted him what he requested." How many know that what Jabez really was asking for was more influence? He was saying, he wasn't, we see expand my border, and we think about more land. But, listen, I hate to quote Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook, but he said this, Mark Zuckerberg said this, he said, your network is your net worth. Write that down. Your network is your net worth. That's why I love that talk on the elevator speech. I find every day if someone's within arm's distance of me, I'm going to meet that person. Everybody is tuned into a radio station. It's called WIFM. I heard somebody else say that. It stands for What's in it for me. What's in it for me? Everybody's tuned into that radio station. And when you see people, if you really want to know how to meet people who could potentially use what you have, find something about them to talk about. That's your best elevator speech. Because once you talk about them, you'll get them talking about themselves. See, people want to talk about themselves. Because what happens most of the day, people are negative. They're talking poorly. They're tearing down their character, their self-esteem. And the second you pull out something about them, the more they want to connect with you. And when you connect with them, that's when you have someone to add to your network, potentially someone that you can minister to. Someone who knows that you care. So, I'm going to get this right, I promise you. Anybody watch the football game last night? It was, I'll tell you what, there was a lot of bungling going on. And actually that's where I want to start. Before I get into the 6 principles of influence, I want to talk about 3 agents of influence. And the first one is called the bungler of influence. A bungler is somebody, who doesn't know the principles that I'm going to share with you. And because of that, they literally bungle away opportunities that God has put in their path to be influential. And the problem is, it's not just for their benefit, maybe from a business standpoint, but it's also for the benefit of the person that they could be touching. Think about it. What happens if there's somebody who could benefit from your skill as a counselor, but because you bungle away an opportunity, they never get to receive from you? Ecclesiastes 9:11 says this. It says, but time and chance happen to everyone. You got to be prepared. You got to be ready. Let me give you a story. One of my friends and colleagues is a psychologist by the name of Robert Cialdini. Any of you guys ever heard of Robert Cialdini? He's a tremendous speaker. Cialdini tells a story where there was a software company in Sydney, Australia. And in the middle of the night or late in the evening, they actually received a phone call from one of their top clients in Melbourne. And Melbourne's not a short trip from Sydney. But the owner of that company decided this was one of their best clients. So what he decided to do is he sent not only his two best men, but he himself went out to this company to get this software problem corrected. And when they got there, they actually found out that it was really just a minor problem. And at the end of finishing it very quickly, the IT director came up to the man and said this. She said, thank you so much. You did something that no one has ever done for us. Not only did you send your two best men, but you yourself came. And something very interesting happened. And how many times have you ever received a comment or a compliment like that? So this man, given that situation, replied this. And he said, he heard this come out of his mouth and literally he cringed. And he said, oh, it was no big deal. I would have done it for anybody. And he said immediately, the second he said that, her countenance kind of changed. She stiffened up. And he thought he said something wrong. No, really, we don't mind coming out to Melbourne. The atmosphere is great. We like the hotels, we like the nightlife. And really, he just actually made the situation worse. I'm going to get this right, I promise you. He made the situation worse. Because see, he threw out her compliment. He threw out a sincere compliment. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what to do in that situation. But I want you to remember, that man bungled away an opportunity. Because right there, that's something, one of the principles we're going to talk about is the principle of reciprocity. And we're going to learn about that in a second. A second agent of influence, got it right, is the smuggler of influence. Now, the smuggler of influence is somebody who really knows well the principles I'm going to teach you shortly, but uses them to his advantage, and not necessarily to the advantage of his client or his customer. Proverbs 20:10 says, diverse weights and diverse measures, both of them are an abomination to the Lord. God wants us to use our knowledge for good. Somebody was talking about positive versus negative. I think it was Vince was talking about using our leadership for positive versus negative, because you can use it either way. And persuasion and influence is simply that. It's leadership. We have the ability with our knowledge to lead people down the path. And I'll give you an example of this. Let's say you go to Best Buy and you want to buy a computer. And the salesman really pushes one computer and he says, not only is this computer the best, I have it myself and I know how great it works. But really he doesn't own that. It's just the one who gives him the highest commission. You see, now the problem with that is not only is it poor for the customer, but really in the long run, it's going to be bad for the salesman as well. Because once that customer uses that and finds that really doesn't fit his need, he's never going to use that salesman again. See, he's never going to go back and he's never going to trust that person. So you definitely don't want to be a smuggler of influence. And I don't think anybody in this room would be guilty of that, at least not intentionally. And the third, and what I think we should all endeavor to be, is what's called the detective of influence. Now, how many of you grew up with Scooby-Doo? All right, I knew I was in the right room. So the detective of influence is someone who understands the principles that I'm going to share and then looks for opportunities and ways to use them to everyone's benefit. You don't just wait for them. You actually search out for the opportunity. And again, I'll go back to what Vince said. Vince was talking about a leader is someone who reads, right? Leaders are readers, right? And he said leaders not only read books, but they read people. And I'll add to that, Vince, leaders read situations. They read situations and they understand what people need. And what they do is rather than coercing somebody into making a decision that may not be in their best interest, they inform them into a proper yes that's beneficial for all parties involved. Bible tells us we need to search the scriptures. We need to search out things. Can't just wait for things to fall in our lap. God's given us a brain. He's given us a mind, and we need to go ahead and use it. So let's go back to our example of our bungler of influence. So I'll review the situation. The IT director had just given the man a great compliment, thanked him for coming out, and he responded by saying, I would have done it for anybody, even though that wasn't even true. He wouldn't have done it for anybody. He went the extra mile, and yet he deserved the compliment, and he deserved the praise, but yet he turned it away. He literally slapped that opportunity for influence out of the window. What I want to do now is I want to take 30 seconds, and I want you to talk amongst yourselves and figure out what would you have said if you received a similar type compliment. Go ahead, 30 seconds. Okay, time's up. Time's up. I know that 30 seconds doesn't seem long. Anybody have any ideas? Just by somebody give me a hand. Who would say? What would you have said? Somebody gives you a great Evan. What would you have said?
Thank you for the compliment, but you're one of our best customers, and we'll take any extreme necessary to make sure that we service you properly.
Good. So he would go ahead and he would take that and he would say, he would expand upon that and say, we would go the extra mile for you because of our relationship. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you for the compliment. It was our pleasure. Anybody else? Give me one more comment. One more. Come on.
Well, thank you for letting us serve you, and we find that you're a valued customer of ours, and we're so happy to do it for you.
Good. Excellent. You heard what she said? She said, thank you for letting us serve you. Let me give you a couple different things you could potentially say. Cialdini had just recently published a second book, which he calls Moments of Power. And he says that immediately following a sincere thank you, you've just been given a moment of power. And during those moments of power, one of the things you can do is you can expand upon the relationship by asking for a testimonial. That's a great time to ask for a testimonial and say, we're glad to do that for you. It's something that we would do to anyone who we value their relationship and partnership with. Would you be willing to put that down in writing so that I can show other people just how we go the extra mile for clients? So it's a way to kind of get a testimonial. Another way would be used to expand on that relationship by saying, do you know anybody else who might like that type of service? You ask for a referral. And then a third way, and one of the things that I think it really hinges on the fact, especially if it's a long relationship, you would say something to this effect. Say, but of course, that's what long-term partners do for one another. You see, by adding that term for one another, you then, again, you latch on to the spiritual principle of reciprocity. You latch on to the spiritual principle of reciprocity. Don't be afraid, because literally you've earned it. And the law of reaping and sowing shows that, that's a fair exchange. When you do something that's of excellence and above and beyond, you've earned fair exchange. Don't think you haven't. I heard this the other day, and this is a great quote, and I don't even know who said, I wish I did, but they said this. They said, society works better when givers receive. Because givers are more likely to then go ahead and give back. Don't ever be afraid to receive what you've honestly earned. Society works better when givers receive. Let's talk about the principle of reciprocity. We're going to go through these 6 here, and I know I don't have much time, so I'll do that. But what I want you to do is look at that. When you think of reciprocity, I want you to think one hand washes the other. That's going to be our word picture. One hand washes the other. And I've got 2 mints up there, and actually I need 2 volunteers. Who wants to have a nice little dinner? Come on, Nellie, Lucy, come on. And while they're walking up, I just want to touch on that scripture, because to me this is huge. This is what we call the golden rule in Christendom. It says this. It says, so in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the laws and the prophets. And I want you to notice it doesn't say do to others after they do unto you. You and I should always be first. We should always be first in improving someone's comfort level. You know, in my office, we have a policy, and my secretaries are taught from the very first day that they come in that the second somebody walks through the door, you need to find out whatever you can do to make them more comfortable. Whether it's give them a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, a bottle of water, show them where the bathroom is. You need to be, your whole job is to be about making their comfort level higher. Because you know why? Because the law of reciprocity says this. It says people stand at the ready to give back the type of treatment they've already received. And I want you to know this is true not just in the United States, but literally in every culture that you go to. Because you know, we have really nasty words for people who take but never give back, right? We call them moochers. Maybe we call them ingrates. I call them teenagers. And I've got 2 mints up there, and the reason I have 2 mints up there is it reminds me of a study. There was a study that was done at Cornell University, which is a great Ivy League school, and what they did was they actually went into restaurants. How many of you ever go to Olive Garden? You know, you see they got the big bowl of mints. Olive Garden should have read this study, or at least their waiters and waitresses should have read this study. Because what happened in the study was very interesting, is they wanted to see what a waiter could do after all the merits of the case for his service were in that might increase his tip. And so what do you think they did? So when the waiter came back with the bill, he left some mint. And what they found out was that by adding simply 1 mint, which probably cost about $0.015, the waiter's tip went up 3%. 3% is not a lot, but just think about if you could add 3% to your bottom line every year, right? But what I like about this study is they didn't stop there. Then they tried it, and they had the waiter do something really outrageous. When he gave them their bill, he left them 2 mints. And the tip went up a whopping 12% with 2 mints. But they didn't stop there. They did one more thing, and I want you to see this. So this is what happened. Waiter comes, drops off the bill, leaves 1 mint, turns around to walk away, stops in his track, and says, you know what? For you nice people. There's 2. You guys can go ahead and have a seat. Give him a hand. And that really points out something very significant about the law of reciprocity. And it's this. For you to receive the maximum credibility, for you to maximize this law of reciprocity, 3 things need to happen. The first thing is it must be significant in the eye of the beholder. It must be significant in the eye of the beholder. So 2 mints represents what? 100% increase over 1 mint. Number 2, it must be unexpected. The waiter went to walk away, he turned around. It was unexpected. And number 3, it must be personalized. What did he say? He said, for you nice people. For you nice people. I'll tell you what I do in my office, and that's why I have the pen up there. I'll go back. The reason I have the pen up there is this, is how many of you ever given away pens with your logo on it? It's the wrong name. It's your name. It buys you absolutely no loyalty. Let me tell you what I do in my office. When a new patient comes into my office, my secretary knows how to emboss. So she makes a little baggie, and she embosses the initials of the person on the baggie. So when they walk out, they usually have just a little bit of hand lotion. I mean, it's probably cost us less than $2. Actually, last week we took a trip over to Michael's, and we bought water bottles, and she actually is now able to stencil onto the water bottles. The water bottles cost me 40 cents. But when you hand somebody a water bottle with their name on it, it's their name. Buys you way more credibility, and it buys you way more loyalty. How many of you remember the marketing debacle of the century back in the 1900s, right? New Coke versus old Coke. Well, that brings up another principle of influence and persuasion called the principle of scarcity, which basically says this: people want more what they can have less of. Very interesting thing about the whole new Coke, old Coke thing is that there was actually a guy by the name of Gay Mullins. And Gay Mullins organized an organization. It was called the Cola Lovers of America, in which he decided he was going to create a class action lawsuit against Coca-Cola because they had taken away his beloved Coke. Now the funny thing is that in 3 blind taste tests, Gay Mullins every time chose New Coke. But again, it was this principle of loss. You see I have a quote there by Cialdini. I won't go into it fully, but there was a study that was done in California in which they went to homeowners and offered an energy audit. And in that energy audit, they basically told one group of homeowners that if they insulated their home, they'd save 50% on their electric bill. They told another group that if they didn't insulate, that they would lose 50%. It would cost them 50% more. And the people that they told would cost 50% more ended up insulating 150% more than the other group. Lost language speaks well. And you know, it's interesting because Jesus was an expert at this. How many times do you see in the scripture where it says, and Jesus slipped away? He slipped away. The less he was available, the more people wanted him. He slipped away. Let's talk about the principle of authority. This one I remember most because when I was a kid, my parents would only buy Crest toothpaste. Anybody want to fathom a guess why? Exactly, because at the time, Crest was the only company that offered this 9 out of 10, dentist, or the ADA, the American Dental Association, was approved. And authority is really essential. Because who the heck has time to be an expert in everything? That's why we have authorities. That's why we have specialists, because we don't have time. It's much easier for me to go into the store and see on the back of whether it's Crest or Colgate or whatever brand that says they have the ADA's approval than for me to go to the library and figure out what needs to be in toothpaste for it to clean my teeth. I don't have time to do that. I need to go in, and I've got so many decisions to make during the course of my day that I just can't do that. Well, there was another study done about physical therapists in a local hospital, actually. And what they found was that with stroke patients, while they were in the hospital, the patients did all their exercises. But when they leave, they were no longer compliant. And they asked the patients, why was that? Well, they said, well, the problem is when we were in the hospital, we knew the doctors, we knew their credentials, but once we were kind of an outpatient basis, we were handled by the physical therapy staff, and we didn't know their credentials. Let me tell you what the implication is for you here, is you need to make sure your credentials are displayed. It's not enough that you're a counselor, but if you have certifications, if you have extra courses that you've taken, you need to display your credentials. And not only that, if you have a staff, your staff needs to display your credentials. It was great. The introduction I had today, if I had given that for myself, you would have said, man, he is one arrogant dude. Right? But when somebody else gives it, it's totally different. You see, you can't walk into a room and tell your client, well, I've done this, this, and this, and this, and that, without looking like you're bragging. But if your staff members do that, it adds credibility. It adds credibility. And it's credibility you've already earned. See, the interesting thing about this is after they found out about that, they went and they put the physical therapist credentials up, and it took about half, like a wall this size, full of their credentials, and then compliance went up over 50%. But the interesting thing is they had the credentials the whole time, they just weren't available. So we need to make sure that we make our credentials available. Now there is one type of authority figure that's known to be the most credible. And you'll see the but there, and I'll explain to you. I like to use word pictures. Who here is a football fan? Anybody really into football? What they're doing now with a lot of sports teams is they don't even put up plays with numbers. Actually now the coaches actually put up images. I was telling Vince, I just listened to an audio by John Maxwell where he talks about the images of leadership. But images are huge. That's why I like to use the images so these principles will stick in your mind a little bit better. But the credible communicator is this. It's somebody who not only has knowledge, but it's somebody who's trustworthy. It's somebody who has knowledge or authority or expertise, but also is trustworthy. Now, if you know somebody for a long time and they understand who you are and what you're about, trustworthiness is not a problem. But what happens when you're in that elevator situation and you only have 30 seconds? Or you're meeting a client in your office for the first time. You haven't had years and years and years and years to develop a level of trust where they understand that you're trustworthy. Well, there's a way to do that. And as a matter of fact, you'll find that many major advertisers are very, very good at this. Very good. And the way that you demonstrate trustworthiness is by doing this. It's by being willing to expound upon or to talk about a weakness. When you're able to tell somebody what your weakness or the weakness of your product or your service, then they understand that they can trust you. And that's where the but comes in. Because what happens is once you tell about your weakness, then you use the word but, and you bridge into your greatest strength. We'll talk, I'll give you a couple that you probably already know because you're all in my age group. Remember Avis? Remember Avis? Remember their slogan was, we're number 2, we try harder, right? So their weakness is we're number 2, their strength is we're trying harder than everybody else. So they bridge from their weakness to their strength. A second one, I'll give you ladies, L'Oreal. Remember their slogan? Anybody remember L'Oreal's slogan? Right. We're expensive. We're expensive. We're not the cheapest, but you're worth it. See, they took their number 1 weakness, they used the word but and bridged to their strength. Now let me just stop right there. I'm not suggesting by any stretch of the imagination that you sit down with a client, you give them a laundry list of all your weaknesses. You know, I did this, I did that, I stole a pencil when I was 12, you know. No. But what you need to do is you need to find a weakness that you can demolish with your greatest strength. And when you can do that, you gain credibility and trustworthiness. You know, literally, in every language, the word but means this. It means take what I just said and put it aside and focus on what I'm about to say. And you see, that's the problem with a lot of us is very frequently, and this is very human to do, but what we do is we talk all about our great strengths, what we can do, and and then we finish off by saying, but it costs this or that, or you have to be here 6 times a week. You know, and you know what? This happens to major companies. You know, Ford had a lot of, the Ford Motor Company, that's why I've got Ford up there, the Ford Motor Company in the early 2000s had a lot of difficulties. And they actually attempted to come out of this with something called the Way Forward program. And William Ford, who was the CEO of Ford in the early 2000s, he got up before a board of people that he was looking to get money from, and he said this, he says, we're making strides and we're making progress, but we've got a long way to go. How should he have said it? Exactly. You have to use the word but in the proper sequence. See, that's something that doesn't cost you any money to change your sequence, but it could add dollars to your pocket. Right? I mean, if you do a major advertising campaign, it could cost you thousands of dollars, but literally by changing the sequence of words, how you frame what you say, you can be more successful. Oh, I still haven't learned that. So here we go. Turn minus into pluses. Use the word but as a transition, and that's another one of those moments of power. That's another one of those moments of power. The principle of consistency and commitment. Well, you know, I got to do this. I want to say one more thing about my last topic there. How many of you ever heard of Berkshire Hathaway? Right? Do you know what their stock, do you know what the value or the cost of one of their A shares of stock was yesterday? Take a guess. Somebody take a guess. For one share, $212,000. You want to know why Berkshire Hathaway is so successful? Do you know that for the last 13 years, that when they give their end of the year reports to their stockholders, they always start out by mentioning a negative first before they go into all their positives? They've only recommended one book, by the way, in those last 13 years, and it's actually by Robert Cialdini, called Influence. I'll give a plug to my buddy. Let's talk about the principle of consistency and commitment. And this basically says this, is that people are logically inclined to make a step when they make a smaller step that's consistent with the big step that you want them to take. And I have a restaurant up there, and this is supposed to be a what do you call it? Whatever you see. Now it's all computerized, but back in the day, you know, when they would take reservations, it was a pad. And this comes from a restaurant in Chicago where they found that a big problem in restaurants was that they had about a 30% no-show base. In other words, people would literally make a reservation, and then what would happen was they just wouldn't show up. And literally by changing 2 words in a phone script when they would make a reservation, they were able to turn that from 30% to only 10%. Oop. That's all right. Take your time. Tell Jesus I said hello. Just kidding. So they went from a 30% to a 10% no-show rate. And all they did was literally add 2 words. From saying, will you call, to, or excuse me, if you're going to cancel, please call, to will you call? And then pause and wait. Pause and wait. And see, that allows the person then to affirm, yes, I will call if I need to cancel my reservation. And I'll tell you, the biblical principle on this is amazing. I love this one. It's one of my favorite ones. And you won't see it here. But Romans 10:8 says this. It says, but if thou wilt confess with thy mouth and believe in thy heart that that God has raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved. 3 different things take place for an affirmation to count. Number 1, it needs to be actively made. They asked the person, they waited for them to say, yes, I'll call. Number 2, it needs to be publicly made. Right? They made it between them and the person they were talking to. And number 3, it must be voluntarily made. Let me tell you what the implication is to you. So let's say you're sitting down with your client, right? You're usually in there, you're taking notes, right? Right? Do you take notes when the people that you're counseling talk to you? What about them? Do they have a notepad? Okay. Here's a notepad for your next client. So, there you go. See, people are more likely to live up to what they write down. So what you need to do is, when you're making recommendations, make that so that your client, or your I guess client would be the use, right? Your patient, I don't know if you use the term patient, but your patient, your client, actively commits to whatever recommendation you make. That way, you're both in agreement. Because if you're 100% into their care, but they're only 60% in the care, you know what? You're going to become very frustrated. But by getting them to actively, publicly, and voluntarily commit to whatever process or treatment recommendation you make, you're going to find they're going to be much more likely to live up to that. The next one is called the principle of consensus or social proof. And what this one states here is this. It states that people like to do or like to follow the lead of others and similar others. They like to follow the lead of others and similar others. Got the NordicTrack up there. Anybody buy one of those? I'm sure there's a few of them in a closet. So here's an interesting thing that happened. Colleen Zott is an infomercial writer. And Colleen Zott is known to be one of the most successful infomercial writers. And I know this partly because I've studied it, but actually a really good friend of mine, that's what he did. He actually did infomercials with the likes of Jack Nicklaus and Arnold Palmer, and actually helped them to put together golf videos. We used to have a great men's group in New Jersey that met together. And he knew well of this woman, Colleen Zott. But Colleen Zott even surprised herself with what she was able to do to cause over 260,000 units of the Nordic tract to be sold in 1 month. That's a lot of expensive hangers. And she only did one thing. And if you ever hear this in an ad, in an infomercial, you'll know it was from the mind of Colleen Zott, and it was this. You know, usually what someone would say is this, is operators are what? Standing by, right? Colleen Zott changed that. And her line, her tagline, her call to action line was simply this. If operators are busy, please call again. You would say, man, who the heck wants to be inconvenienced? But see, think about the word picture. Operators are standing by, right? You got the picture of somebody sitting at a chair in a call center, filing their nails, just waiting for the phone to ring, right? And nobody's calling. That's operators are standing by. Or all your friends and everybody you know is getting on the line to call and order their Nordic tract. I better get one so I'm like everybody else. People want to follow the lead of others and similar others. How many of you have ever been into a hotel room and you've seen those signs that say, you know, about being green, right? So they did a study in Phoenix, Arizona, and the study in Phoenix, Arizona did this. Rather than just have the sign that said, please recycle because it's good for the environment, what the sign said was this. It says, the majority of people who stayed in this hotel recycled. Now that was pretty good because that actually increased compliance with recycling by about 23%. They went one step further, and what do you think they did? Those are both good ideas, but really we're just dealing with words and influence. What they did was they put the majority of people who stayed in this room, similar others, went over 40% compliance rate based on that. It's amazing how just the words that we speak and the way that we frame our phrases and our influence can affect people. I put this scripture up here because when you think about the woman at the water pot, she went back into her city. And she said, this is a man who told me things that about her whole life. And then she brought everybody back. How does this affect you? Well, we talked about testimonials before. The right testimonials, not just any testimonials. You want testimonials that fit or closely suit your client's issues. So typically, I'll tell you what I do in my office when we have a whole book of testimonials that was written by a variety of people who play golf, people who play tennis, people who are grandmothers, people who couldn't travel but now can travel. And so what my secretary is instructed to do is to find out little bits and pieces of information from people as they call in. So we will endeavor to do our best to put the testimonials at the front of the booklet most closely related to that client. And then when my secretary takes them back and does all the vital signs, before she walks out of the room, she'll hand them the testimonial book and say, the doctor will be with you shortly. So instead of them reading a magazine, which does absolutely nothing for me, they read a testimonial that's a similar situation. And you might say, well, that's manipulation. Actually, it's not. It's influence. It's showing them, listen, there have been people who have been in your same situation. We've treated them. They've gotten better. Don't discount what we do because maybe some doctor said chiropractors don't help. Because believe me, I've seen that many times. It gives them the opportunity to think and have an open mind and to be properly influenced for their good. Know that majority rules. Whenever a favorable consensus exists, make it known. So if there's a lot of people that are saying good things about you, make that known. Don't be ashamed of that. You've earned that. The principle of liking. This is one of my favorite ones. How many of you people know that in a all things considered equal, people like to do business with people that they like? What makes somebody like somebody else? That's what I want to talk about today. Well, that's pretty neat. It's the first time I ever saw that. My secretary is playing around with this. She's funny. All right. So what makes people like others? Well, there's three things: similarities, complements, and cooperative efforts, or common causes. So what does that mean? That means when you're sitting down and you're doing an intake with someone, you need to endeavor to talk to them generally and find out what are similarities. What similarities you have? What do you have in common? Same thing when you meet somebody out in the street. Before, to me, if somebody walks up to me and says, and please don't take this the wrong way, but if someone walks up to me and says, I'm a Christian counselor, can I have your number? I'm walking the other way and saying that person's weird. But if they walk up to me, they endeavor to know me, we connect, and they say something to the degree of this, you know what? I really like you. Maybe we should stay in touch. It's a lot easier to get a phone number that way. Maybe we should stay in touch. I may be able to help you down the road. Always think from your own perspective. Would I think this is strange or weird? But see, once you develop a connection, it's much easier to get that information. And talk about business cards, I don't like to give my business card out. I'd rather get somebody else's business card. Because see, if I give them mine, then the whole process is in their hands. If I can get theirs, the process is in my hands. And I believe God's given me wisdom, knowledge, and understanding when it comes to how to influence people. Compliments. Literally look for what is it that you like about this other person. Give them a compliment. Tell them you like their hair, their dress, their clothes, their watch. Whatever it is. And those are also things that oftentimes, again, I talked about that WIFM. When you're out in the marketplace, it's very easy. If you see a piece of clothing, a pair of shoes, a watch, a hat, maybe they have the Ohio State or Florida State or whatever they have on their shirt. Those are great things to start a conversation. Cooperative efforts, things that we do together. You need to let your clients know that what you're doing is a cooperative effort. Now, what's the number one rule in business when it comes to liking? Can anybody tell me? What have we been told? What's that? Well, be sincere, right? But have you ever been told that to get people to like you, right? Have you heard that before? That's the number one rule in business, get people to like you? Okay. Well, I'm going to tell you that's definitely not the number one rule when it comes to liking. The number one rule in liking is get to like your client. Because what benefit is it to them to do business with you if they like you? As compared to them knowing you like them and have their best interests at heart, then they're going to want to do business with you. Because then they know that they can trust you. Then they know that what recommendations you make, you're not making to line your own pockets or for your own benefit. You're making because it's in their best interest. And you're going to do whatever it takes to see that they're successful. So make sure when you're in that intake process and you're meeting with them that you go over those things. Find things that help you to understand them more. Find similarities that help you like them more. Find things that complement them so you feel better, even more so about them. And then make sure you tell them and you get to the point where they know that it's a cooperative effort, that I'm not satisfied unless you're satisfied. And if you do that, you'll have a client for life. So listen, I know that I went through a lot of information here today. I don't expect you to remember all these things. I know you took notes. You're not going to walk around with those notes, tied around on your lanyard, so when you're in an elevator, you can pull it out. So what I've done was I've actually made a couple of wallet-sized cards. And on these wallet-sized cards are all 6 principles, as well as the word pictures that I used to help you remember them. So what I would ask is the next time you find yourself in a situation where, you're faced with an opportunity to influence someone, step back and see which one of these is the best. Find it, be that detective of influence and help find the best solution for them. On the back it says this, the most important persuasion tool you have in your entire arsenal is integrity. Influence, never smuggle it. When you bungle it, learn from your mistake and endeavor to be a detective, searching out the opportunities to better utilize your inherent and learn persuasive gifts for the benefit of all. Thank you all very much.